Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here tonight, broadcasting live from Lakewood, New Jersey. It looks like it's the last live summer class from Lakewood. Bezat Hashem will be back in Brooklyn starting the coming week. Kidarkenu Bakodesh, I'd like to start with a beracha. I actually made the beracha. I just remembered. And we're here in the basement of my very close Talmud, Gal. He opened up his house, his Wi-Fi, and all his connections so that his Rebbe can give the shiurim and broadcast it live. And that zechut of all the Torah that was dispensed from this home over the last summer. Hashem should bless him that his home should always be a place that Torah will be dispensed from, both in the way of his own Torah and the way of his children, Banim u'bnei Banim, Talmidei Chachamim, Amen ken yeh ratzon. Okay, here we go. Ki tetzeh lamilchama al oivecha. Wow, what a parasha. And to think that we're on our way to the great day of judgment, only a few weeks away from Rosh Hashanah. And it's purposely placed, strategically, that parasha Ki tetzeh always falls out in Elul. It's one of those parashiot that really gets us ready for the great Yom Hadin. The parasha preparation, the parasha of Teshuva, the parasha to understand the enemy and how to work to beat Yetzer Hara. Ladies and gentlemen, Ki tetzeh lamilchama al oivecha. When we go out to war, and there on the battlefield, what do you see? You see v'shavita shivyo, that there are captives. So sure enough, amongst the captives, this Jewish soldier, v'ra'ita b'shivya, what does he see? Eshet yefat to'ar. He sees amongst the captives a beautiful woman. V'chashakta ba. He now has a want for her. V'lakachta la leisha. And now he's going to take her as a wife. Says the pasuk, wait one second. There are steps. Calm down, Yetzer Hara. You can have her, but step by step. First, va'aveta el toch betecha. First, bring her home to your house. V'gilchat rosha. Shave off her hair. Astat tzipornea. Let her nails grow out. V'hesirat simla shivya me'alea. Then take the clothing of captivity off of her. Dress her in proper clothing. V'yashva bebetecha. And then she has to sit in your home. And what does she do in your house? Ubachta et avia vet ima. Let her cry her eyes out. For how long? She's crying over her father, her mother, her family, the parents that she's lost from. For how long? Yerach yamim, for 30 days. V'acharkein. And then after all that, when you went through all those steps, then already you can have her for a wife. Says Hachaim Hakadosh, this isn't one of those once upon a time old biblical wars that we're talking about. This isn't even talking about a today war. This is talking about the war of life. And this story of the Jew that goes out to war and goes and sees the Yefat To'ar, that's the name of this piece. This is our life story. Matter of fact, this entire story, says the Hachaim Hakadosh, is really a mashal. It's a parable to the life of a Jew. And I'd like to cut it up the way the Hachaim gives it over word for word, stanza by stanza in the pasuk, and you'll see how beautifully he brings this mashal from the words of the pasuk itself. Open your hearts. The Hachaim is found in this week's parasha on the beginning, right at the beginning of Ki tetzeh, and listen to the words of Hachaim Hakadosh. And he writes, the great mashal for life, Ki tetzeh la milchama al oivecha. When you go out to war against your great enemy. There's only one great enemy that every Jew has. And that's the enemy that's looking for your demise every moment and every turn of your life. And he's the deadliest enemy you'll ever encounter. I remember my Rebbe used to tell me, in the name of the great Rabbi Miller, Rabbi Victor Miller, Zechet Tzadik Lebracha, he used to say that if you ever go up to a high mountain, if you ever go up to a tall building, and you look down, suddenly there's a voice inside, a voice that screams, jump, just get it over with. Says Rabbi Miller, that voice is the Yetzer Hara. No, you're not crazy. I remember one time we had this, we went mountain climbing in camp, and we went on to the top of the very high mountain, and I was looking down off the side, and for a minute there, I actually heard the voice. It said, jump, just let it go. And I thought I was crazy, until one day, Baruch Hashem, my Rebbe told me this piece about Rabbi Miller, and he said, no, you're not crazy. It's real. There's really a voice inside. There's a Yetzer Hara, and everyone experienced this. And the voice says, jump. On every turn in life, he's looking to finish you. He's looking for our demise. And you know why he's so deadly? Because he comes with such an innocent voice. Matter of fact, he hijacks our natural voice. And there's no one in this world that we trust more than ourselves. So when he comes with our voice, he's coming with such a trusting voice, a voice that's kind of coaching us, the voice that we rely on, the voice that we trust, our own inner voice. And he disguises himself in that voice, as if he's coming to help us. And then he gives us some horrible direction or some horrible suggestion. And for a minute there, we even jumped that we could even think that way or even consider something like that. But it's not us. That's the oivecha. That's a very deadly, a very conniving, a very diabolical enemy. Ki tetzeh la milchama oivecha. Says Hachaim Hakadosh. Ki tetzeh, when you go out. Where are you going out from? Says Hachaim Hakadosh, and I want to tell you his words because his words are magnificent. Listen to these words. Leha'ir ha'adam. This is to kind of wake up man, to realize. Ki bitziato me'olam ha'elyon. Ki tetzeh, when you go out. From where? From the olam ha'elyon. When you go out from the upper worlds. When you come out from heaven. Lavo le'olam hazeh. In order to come down to this world as you're born and you enter life. At that moment, ki tetzeh, when you leave heaven and you come down to this world, you should know you're coming down to be muchan lemilchama al oivecha. The words of Hachaim Hakadosh. Okay, so ki tetzeh, you leave heaven, you come down to this world, and you start life, you start the great war against oivecha, against your enemy. Says Hachaim Hakadosh, v'shavita shivyo. And you see that there are captives. And then amongst those captives, you see a beautiful, attractive captive. Says Hachaim Hakadosh, that captive, that you are hashakta ba, that captive is referring to your neshama. Our neshamot sometimes are grabbed and held captive by the Yetzer Hara himself. And we are coming now to grab that captive in this great war and to take it back. V'chashakta ba. I realize that, oh my gosh, that's my soul that's being taken by the devil. I got to take it back. So now we grab our neshama back. And sure enough, says Torah, what do you do when you grab that neshama out of the captivity of war? You take back your soul from captivity. Bring it home. Bring it back. Veheveta el betecha. Bring it back. Veheveta el toch betecha. Bring it back home. Where is home? Where is the betecha? Says Hachaim Hakadosh, this is the Bet Midrash. This is the Bet Knesset. Bring it back to the Bet Knesset. Bring it back to the Bet Midrash. Bring your soul back to yeshiva. Bring your soul back to the Bet Knesset. Come back to learning. But it's not enough. It's at that point that says Hachaim Hakadosh, vehesira et simlat shivya me'aleha. It's at that point that you take the neshama and you strip and remove all the dirty bigadim that's on her. The bigadim of captivity. The neshama had layers and layers of dirty bigadim, of sins, of captivity. We lose ourselves. So many addictions today. So many things that we lost our freedom. We're not even in control of ourselves anymore. We're captives of all different addictions, of all different social addictions, social media, actual addictions, drug addictions, drinking addictions, different types of, God forbid, addictions that bring people to very bad places. We're out of control. It's time to get the control back. Take your soul back and start ripping away at the layers of the dirt, of the sins and the addictions that we lost our control over. It's time to take back control. How do we do this? Says the Hachaim Hakadosh, rip away at those bgadim, those layers of dirt and sin, and then v'yasheva bebetecha, then bring her back to the Bet Midrash, to the Bet Knesset. Bring your soul back to the places it belongs, and there in the Bet Midrash and in the Bet Knesset, do Teshuva, ubachta et avia ve'et ima. Do Teshuva. Clean her up. Bring her back to the Bet Knesset, to the Bet Midrash, and then cry, and then do Teshuva. Ubachta, and cry. Let her cry over Aviha, over her father in heaven, that she rebelled against, ve'et ima, and Knesset Yisrael, for not being the great Jew that our potential was screaming for us to be. Here is Teshuva in the Pasuk, crying over our father, crying over Klal Yisrael. How long? Says the Pasuk, Yerach Yamim. For 30 days. Says our Hachaim Hakadosh, those are the 30 days of Elul. And here's the great mashal. The mashal of the Yefat To'ar. Our neshama is the Yefat To'ar. Finally, we bring her back from war, we bring her back from captivity. We strip off all the later layers of dirt and sin and all the addictions we free her from. And we bring her back home to the Bet Knesset where she belongs, to the Bet Midrash where she belongs. And we allow her to cry, and we cry with her. Ubachta, we do Teshuvah over the rebellion of Avia ve'et ima, that we rebelled against our Father in heaven. Yerach Yamim, for 30 days, for the days of Elul. And we cry as we come to Teshuvah, as we come to the great day of Rosh Hashanah. What a liberation. What a liberating message. What a magnificent mashal. And listen to the words and how it resonates in the psukim. Here is the message of Elul. And here's the prep as we get ready for the great day. This is something incredible. By the way, it's not just Or Hachaim Hakadosh, but the Arizal, in the works of the Ari and Likutei Torah, and the Zohar Hakadosh, in Zohar Hadash, they both write, Yerach Yamim, 30 days. The words of the Zohar Hakadosh is, Da hi yarcha de Elul. These are the days of Elul. So they also understand this as the great mashal of the neshama of a Jew, the Yefat To'ar, that's finally been taken back from captivity in this great war against Yetzer Hara, cleaned up, brought home, Teshuvah, crying over father and mother, the rebellion of Avinu Shebashamayim, Yerach Yamim, for the days of Elul. Unbelievable. So if I were to ask you, after everything we just said, where is Teshuvah in the Pasuk? It's very clear, as we said, the words, or Haim, Ubachta et avia ve'et ima. we cry over the rebellion that we rebelled against our Father. But it's interesting. Is crying really a part of the Teshuva process? Does one have to cry in order to come to Teshuva? I mean, this is something to think about. Is crying part of Teshuva, guys? And I want to tell you, this question bothered me for years. You see, I myself, Duvi ben Shushan, I grew up in the Mir Yeshiva. My father, Hashem should bless him, Arichut Yamim Mishanim, Yitzchak ben Shushan, who today is the rabbi in the shul on the outside of Westgate, the Moroccan shul. My father, every year, since I could ever remember, as young as my feet can carry me, my father's the Baal Tokea of the Mir Yeshiva on Oran Ocean Parkway. And every year he stands in front of 2,000 people of the great tzaddikim of the Mir Yeshiva, and he's the one that blows the shofar for now almost 40, 50 years. And it turns out that because my father was Baal Tokea, we as children prayed Rosh Hashanah and Kippur in the Mir Yeshiva. I remember as a little boy, we lived on Avenue Elul 13th before my parents moved to Lakewood. We would walk from Avenue Elul East 13th all the way to Avenue U and V in East 7th, the house of Rabbi Haliwa. We would pray in his little shul in the backyard in his garage that he converted to a shul. We would pray there Vatikin. My father would blow 100 kolot in the morning, and then right after that, we would walk over to the Mir Yeshiva, where he would blow a second 100 kolot for the yeshiva, because the yeshiva prayed much slower, so we had plenty of time. The yeshiva finishes Rosh Hashanah, they finish about 3:30 every day. So we had time to get there for him to blow the second 100 kolot. So I grew up in the Mir Yeshiva. I grew up with Reb Leibel Birnbaum sitting 2 seats away from me. I grew up with Reb Shmuel Brudny, with Reb Elia Brudny sitting in front of me. And I grew up with, at the end of the row, Reb Lezer Ginsburg, Shalita, who till today is the Baal Shliach Tzibur Shachrit in the yeshiva, sitting at the end of the row. And I watched these great men pray on Rosh Hashanah, and they cried their hearts out. They cried like babies. I mean, they cried such a cry. Reb Lezer Ginsburg, before he would go up to start Hamelech, which by the Ashkenazim is where the Hazan begins, the Shachrit, and they started from their chair, which is something interesting to watch. He starts to cry before he got up to the Amud to be Hazan. He was already crying from his seat. So when I grew up, I really thought that a major part of what Teshuvah is all about is crying. It's the way of crying to say, I feel so terrible for what I've done. But then again, I got older. I went to Eretz Yisrael. I learned in Yeshivat Yitri for almost 8 years, both Bachur and Kollel. And I got to meet great tzaddikim in Israel. And suddenly I heard another side to the story. I met a great man by the name of Tzvi Chesed, the great Elul of the Mir Yeshiva, the great Mikubal, the great tzaddik, Reb Tzvi Chesed, the son of the famous Rabbi Chesed from Jerusalem, from the Chesed family of great tzaddikim Mikubalim. And I used to go to Reb Tzvi. I used to go to his Wednesday night Vadim and Shmuzim. It started at Chatzot. It went till 3 to 4 o'clock in the morning, every week. And Reb Tzvi used to tell me, he used to say, Hashem wants Teshuvah out of joy, out of happiness, out of love, not out of crying. He says, crying you'll leave for Kippur, but not Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, he wants Teshuvah and service and prayers out of joy and simcha and love. And he showed me in so many different svarim how the tefillot al yedeh simchat halev, really gives rocket boosters to the tefillot to reach such heights. So I was confused. On one hand, I saw the yeshiva crying their hearts out. And on the other hand, I met tzaddikim that told me, no, simcha, not tears, simcha. I was trying to understand this. Ubachta et avia ve'et ima. Says Orahim Hakadosh, Ubachta, this is the Teshuva that the Neshama is doing on the father that it rebelled against, Avinu Shabashamayim. So it sounds like, from the Hachaim, that crying is a part of Teshuva. But then again, when I open up a Rambam, and the Rambam is the go-to, Rambam Hilchot Teshuva is a classic of a work. For one to really get to the heart and soul of Teshuva, one must go through the works of the Rambam in Hilchot Teshuva, besides Sha'arei Teshuva of Rabbeinu Yonah, but they're both classics. Says the Rambam in Hilchot Teshuva, there are 4 parts to Teshuva. Quickly, what are they? The first, Azivat Achet. Let the sin go and never do it again. Never do it again. But that's a big part of Teshuvah. Many people think Teshuvah is just to write a check to tzedakah. No, that is ma'avirin et roa hagezera. That pushes off the sins that God is merciful and is patient. And Hashem waits. And He gives you more time. But if you keep doing the sin, Teshuvah didn't start. God says, I'll forgive you if you stop doing it. I'll forgive you on condition that you don't do it again. So the first step of Teshuvah, the elementary step, is Azivat Achet. You stop doing the sin. The second part, says Rambam, is Charata. You have to feel really bad. Because the more you feel bad, the more you make an indelible impression on your insides that you really, really will never do it again. And the more you feel bad about it, the more you'll stay away from it. And then the third part of Teshuvah, says the Rambam, is Vidui. Confess. Say out. Obviously not out loud, God forbid. You're not allowed to do that. But between you and Hashem, to confess, like what we do on Yom Kippur. Ashamnu bagadnu. We cry and we confess. Oh, this is what I did. This is what I did. It's like when you go to all those groups, AAA, right? AA, excuse me, not AAA, but AA, right? Alcoholics Anonymous. They make you stand up and say, my name is so-and-so, and I am an alcoholic. If you don't say it, and you don't confess it, and you don't call it how it is, you're not really in tune to do anything about it. Because you're not looking at the problem in the eye. You got to recognize that you have a problem. Confess what you did. Say it. And then feel horrible. And then make up never to do it again. And the fourth one is Kabbalah La'atid. Kabbalah La'atid means that I take upon myself from this day and on that I'll never do it again. And it's different than Azivat Achet. Azivat Achet means that I make up in myself that this is something that I feel horrible I did, and it's not something I should have ever done. Kabbalat La'atid means, and I will never do it again, to demonstrate that I really let go of the chet as I promised in round 1. So these are the 4 parts of Teshuvah. Do you see amongst these 4 parts Rambam mentioning anything about emotions? I don't mean the emotions. Of course, Charata is an emotion. And there's no question that this is very emotional, especially Vidui. But do you see the crying here? The Rambam doesn't mention here crying. If you did these 4 steps and you did not cry, says the Rambam, you did do an excellent Teshuvah. So where then does crying come in play with what Teshuvah was meant to be? From the Rambam, it doesn't sound like it's one of those very integral steps. And this is a question that my Rebbe, Rabbi Rucham Olshan Shalita, the Rosh Yeshiva of Lakewood Yeshiva, he asks in his Sefer Yerech LeMoadim. And by the way, many of the Mar Mekomot tonight, I found in a beautiful share from Rabbi Gladstein, Yedid Nafshi, from Cedarhurst, New York, Hashem should bless him. But most of the Mar Mekomot tonight come from the Sefer Yerach L'Moadim, Rabbi Yerucham Elshin, Shalita, the Rosh HaYeshiva of the Yeshivat Lakewood, my Rebbe. And he wants to know, says Rabbi Yerucham, what does crying have to do with Teshuvah? What role, if there is one, does crying play in Teshuvah at all? So it's interesting. If you take a look at the Pasuk that talks about Teshuvah, the Pasuk says over there two different expressions that both highlight Teshuvah. And obviously we're going to have to understand why you need two. The Pasuk in Parashat Nitzavim, found in Perek Lamed, Pasuk Aleph and Bet. Pasuk says over there, V'hashevota el levavecha. V'hashevota, which is a lashon of to return, Teshuvah. You should return your heart to Hashem. But then the next pasuk says, V'shavta ad Hashem Elokecha, and you will return to God. Now we just said you're going to return your heart. Obviously that's returning to God. Why do we have to say a second time, V'shavta ad Hashem Elokecha? V'hashevota v'shavta, two lashonot of Teshuvah? Says the rabbis, yes. There are two types of Teshuvah. Maybe better said, there are two segments of Teshuvah. And this is spoken about by the Siporno, this is spoken about by the Mabit. They talk about this concept, and the way I'd like to put it out there is the way Rabbi Yerucham puts it out there. And that is something to this extent. Says Rabbi Yerucham that when it comes to Teshuvah in truth, there are two parts. Better, two segments. One segment of Teshuvah is what we just said in the name of the Rambam. It's the halachic Teshuvah. 4 parts. And that has its steps, Azivat Achet, Vidui, obviously Kabbalah Latid, Charata. But that's the actual doing of Teshuvah, step by step, which is represented by Aseret Yemei Teshuvah. Those 10 days, we actually get Teshuvah done. We follow the recipe of those 4 steps, and the halachic Teshuvah is accomplished in Aseret Yemei Teshuvah. However, says Rabbi Yerucham and the Rishonim, there's another segment of Teshuvah that's maybe a prerequisite for the Teshuvah that's done on Aseret Yemei Teshuvah. And that is the Teshuvah of Elul. What is that Teshuvah? Now, if I was here to give a new class, I would say that the two types of Teshuvah is Teshuvah me'ahava, Teshuvah me'yirah. But that's not the point of tonight. Because those Teshuvot are always constant, no matter before an Elul or even after an Aseret Yemei Teshuvah. So they want to go with a different idea. They want to say that the second Teshuvah is a special Teshuvah of Elul. What is that Teshuvah exactly? The way the great Rabbi Yerucham Olshan explains it, Suporno says this, the Mabit says this very clearly, and that is, Teshuvah of Elul is for someone to look inside and to find within themselves the truth, sometimes the bitter truth, of how far away that I fall from Hashem. And I want to explain this. Last year, you remember last year Rosh Hashanah? You know, when the world was yet normal. You know, before COVID and before the riots and before the wild year that we had. And Be'ezat Hashem, when it comes to the speech of this year Rosh Hashanah, I want to tell you a little bit about the Chatam Sofer, what he writes about Tafshin Peh and Tafshin Peh Aleph, and how hundreds of years earlier he told us that these years were coming. It's amazing. But I'll leave that for the Rosh Hashanah speech, because we could use the chizuk. And thank God we have a good year coming. But listen to this. Listen to this. Think about it for a minute. Last year, Rosh Hashanah, we stood there in majesty. We crowned Hashem King. Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, Dirshu Hashem v'hi matz'o. The King's in the field. He's accessible. you can get so close to Him, like no other time of the year. And every day of Asar Yimei Teshuvah fixes that same corresponding day of the week for the whole year in retrospect. Amazing. And then the holiest day of the year, Yom Kippur, comes, the greatest gift, where Hashem is so close, it's like someone who's literally rubbing up against your ear to tell you a secret. That's how close Hashem comes to the Jew and how close we come to Him. And Ne'ilah, forget about it. Ne'ilah, we can't even describe in human words the closeness and the height of a Jew. And we actually leave this world and we enter a different realm. And then starts the days of love, where now we're clean as a whistle. And now we come out to the days of Sukkot, and we come close, and Hashem says, I'm taking you home to my house. Come with me into my sukkah. And we sit together, and we dine and wine each other with love. Until finally it comes down to the last days. Hoshana Rabbah, Hashem says, I'm giving you all the blessings, all the rain, all the shefa, and the last step of kapara, and the last step of teshuvah. And then finally, Shemini Atzeret, which is the zivug. It's the love affair, if we can even say that, between us and Hashem. And then Simchat Torah is the wedding. We're dancing and dancing with each other. I mean, we're dancing away the night. We were like this. We were as close can be, husband and wife, father and son, mother and... It was unbelievable. And then the year started. And we tried so hard to keep that closeness. But life hits. Corona hit. And everything else hit with it. And little by little, that amazing bond started to come apart at the seams, little by little. And sure enough, as the year went on, and so many different unbelievable challenges, we started to sway away. And at the end of the year, we look back and we say, well, what happened? How did I fall so far away from God? How did I fall so far away from Hashem? We were so close. How are we so far? How did I become so far away from you, Hashem? And we have to sit down and think. This is a concept of an Elul Teshuva. How we became so far away from our source of life and everything. And to really feel it. And to contemplate Yerach Yamim for 30 days. Because Teshuvah means to return back to the source, to return back to the origination of everything. And that's Hashem. And now I need to realize that I am distanced in order to have the yearning to want to come back. And this is the Teshuvah, V'hashevota el levavecha. Return your heart back to God. We were so close, and now we're so far. I used to pray so much better. How come I'm not praying like once upon a time? I used to go to Minyan every day. How come I'm not going to Minyan? I used to never miss a Minyan, Mincha Arbit. How come I'm missing right and left? I was so careful with my berachot. Now I swallow it with the food. I was so careful with my keeping a cheshbon with my maaser. I fell out of it. And now I just give and hope that it kind of works out at the end of the month. I was so careful with the laws of purity with me and my wife. And now, okay, I slip every now and then. I shouldn't do what I do. I shouldn't touch what I touch. I shouldn't say what I say in the times that I am allowed to say it, not allowed to say it. We get through the month. You know how it is. We're not exactly married for the first year. We fell so far away from where we should be. And that closeness in the month of Elul is time to go back to the source of what we should be. And that's the closeness to Hashem. Bring your heart back. Reconnect with Borei Olam. Ani lidodi vidodi ni. That's the reconnection process. The month of Elul. That's the prerequisite for the halachic Teshuva that takes place on Aseret Yemei Teshuva. But if you're not ready to admit that we have a problem and that we fell so far away, the Teshuvah process becomes just routine. We go through motions, but how much do they really accomplish if our heart doesn't realize that we're so far away from where we're supposed to be? I think this is a big idea, because right now it explains to us the point of ubachta et avia ve'et ima. You cry. In the month of Elul, you cry over your father that you rebelled. Because this is the month that we realize how far away we are from Hashem. And the minute loved ones find themselves in a position that they're going to be far away from each other, they cry. That is the human reaction. So the crying is not a crying of teshuvah. The crying is a crying of how far away I fell from my loved one. And for that I cry. And that's a natural human reaction. Did your mother take you to the airport when you were going to Israel? Did your mother take you to sleepaway camp and shed a few tears when you pulled off of the bus? You were only going away for July and August. Why was she crying? My mother took me to the airport 100 times, because over those 8 years we went back and forth from Israel like nobody's business. And every single time she took me to the airport for another 6-month stretch of learning in Eretz Yisrael for another year, she cried her heart out by the airport. Her Duvi was going. I'm not going to see him for 6 months. And she cried the 10th time the way she cried the first time. No different. Because the minute that loved ones are taken apart and distance are about to become between them, the human emotion of reaction is to cry. Says Hachaim Hakadosh, we're talking here about Yerach Yamim. We're talking here about the Avodah of Elul, the 30 days that one is crying over his father. But wait, why are you crying? Because the Avodah of Elul is to realize where we're holding and how far we are from where we should be. And the minute you see the distance between you and Avia ve'et Ima, Avinu Shebashamayim, the human reaction is to cry. Because the minute you start crying is the minute you start yearning to go back to where we should be. And when you yearn for something, you bring it a lot closer. That's why we yearn for Mashiach to come, because it's the actual yearning that brings him closer. Chikinu, v'tzipinu, kol hayom. Tzipinu means to yearn. When you yearn for something, you draw it near. We yearn to go back to Eretz Yisrael, and that's going to open up the doors of Israel and get us another opportunity to make it there, b'karov bezat Hashem. We yearn to want to learn more, and that brings the learning to us and allows it to go into our hearts in a way that it stays with us. The more you yearn for something, the more you're able to come close to it. This is the month that we yearn to go back to Hashem, and that's why on Rosh Hashanah it's such a happy day, because there is Abba. We came back to him. This is the glorious day. It's a crowning. It's a realization. It's a revelation that I can be so close again to the King, and I'm not so far off anymore. And that's the beauty of Rosh Hashanah. And that's the prep of now to get to that point. The more you yearn, the more closer you'll get. Yes, Elul, Ubachta, we're crying, how far am I from Abba? But Elul is also about how far I am from me. Who could I be? Who should I be? And I feel so far away from who I really could be. And I'm not really holding where I should be. I'm off track. I'm flying behind schedule. I'm flying really late. And I need some direct aviation. I need some shortcut. I need something to get me back on track, to do the things that I should be doing, to become the person that I really am supposed to be. Why aren't I there? This is Elul. Elul is a time where people start taking personal inventory and look at each other in the face or look at themselves in the mirror and say, hey, where are you at? And where should you be at? And who would you really like to be? Because this is the time that Hashem puts a tremendous koach in the world to get back to where you should be. To cut the gap and cut the distance between you and Him and between you and the real you, yourself. You're supposed to be learning more. Now's the time that He gives kochot to get back to be able to learn more. I'm supposed to be doing bigger stuff for Klal Yisrael. Now's the time He gives kochot to bridge the gap and get back to the real you, the Baal Chesed, the Ben Torah. He gives kochot this month for Shalom Bayit, so that your marriage goes back to what it should be and not the big gaps of distance that came between husband and wife, God forbid, over the year. This is the time. Ani lidodi v'dodi li. Let's do v'hashevota elevavecha. We bring your heart back, Teshuva, to return. We bring it back and close the gap of distance that there is between you and Hashem and you and the real potential of who you're supposed to be. And I'll prove it to you. Many people don't know this. What day of the year was the world created? Everyone thinks it's Rosh Hashanah. It's not true. The world was created on Chaf He Elul. Rosh Hashanah represents the 6th day of creation. So why do we make such a big celebration then? I thought it was Hayom Harat Olam. And the answer is that it's the 6th day of creation. But it's the day that man was created. You need to know something about Judaism and about Jewish holidays. Jewish holidays are not commemoration of what happened in the past, but it is a actual reincarnation of what happened in the past. Every time a holiday comes along, it gives us a little secret, a hint to when Hashem originally created the world, what days in the calendar of the world were certain powers brought into the world every year at that time of year on that day. The holiday of Pesach teaches us that when God originally created the world, on the 15th of Nisan, this burst of freedom comes into the world. Every year on the same day. And that's why Pesach will always be a day for freedom, not just in Egypt, but in the final Geulah as well. Because that day was earmarked from the beginning of creation to always bring freedom into the world. The holiday of Pesach only revealed to us which day was the day of earmark from the original creation that was always to be and will continue to be the day of freedom on the calendar. But that was always about freedom that day. And every year, a burst of freedom comes into the world. So to all the holidays. So Shavuot, there's a burst of a new Matan Torah that comes into the world every year on Vav and Zayin Sivan. It's not because of Matan Torah. Matan Torah was only revealing the day that Hashem decided that every year on that calendar day, a burst of Torah giving will come into the world. Both from that first year all the way till today. And it's true like this always. The story of Chanukah was a story that revealed to us that there are 8 days a year that God placed the recipe for miracles. 1-800 dial a miracle in these 8 days that we call Chanukah. The story only revealed to us which 8 days those were from the beginning of creation. But every year these 8 days come around, miracles come into the world rampant. So if that's the case, on Rosh Hashanah, says the Torah Abraham, Hashem created man. And therefore every year on Rosh Hashanah, the day that God gave man life for the first man in history, is the day that God judges man's life for every year to come until the end of time. And that's why Rosh Hashanah is the day that Hashem judges the life of man for a new year. Because the power of life and creation of man comes back into the world again on Rosh Hashanah this year, as it did the very first man who was created on that same day. Says the Torah Abraham, so if Rosh Hashanah was the day that God created man, then the days leading up to Rosh Hashanah were the days that Hashem Kivyachol was in the planning stages of how to create man. What could we make out of this man that will make him the most incredible creation that world itself would be justified to be created for man? So Hashem says, I'm going to make him a Bal Chesed. Hashem says in the days prior to Rosh Hashanah, he's thinking, Kivyachol, says the Torah Abraham, Hashem is being metachnen. I'm going to make him a Bal Chesed, so he'll do Chesed for others, so he'll emulate me. I'll make him a Bal Rachmanut, so he'll have mercy on others, so he'll emulate me. I'll make him a Bal Torah, so he'll be able to enjoy the greatest gift that I'll give eventually to mankind, called the Torah Kedosha, so that he'll understand and connect to me through the Torah. And all these different planning stages of how to make the best man possible took place in the days prior to man's creation. You know which days those were? Elul, the days leading up to the day that man was created, Rosh Hashanah. And therefore, every single year in Elul, says the Torah Abraham, a burst of siyata dishmaya, of creativity, of strategy, of intellect and energy comes into every man and screams, let me recreate myself again. The coming year, I want to be something so much bigger, so much better, so much more of a complete man. Who I am from last year, I want to bridge the gap to who I really should be this coming year. And these are the days that burst of siyata dishmaya, of heavenly divine help comes in for this purpose. And that's why writes the Torah Abraham that Elul is the greatest opportunity of the whole year. It's Hashem handing you the magic wand of creation, and he says, go back and create yourself for the coming year bigger and better, so that Rosh Hashanah, that's the man I'll make you for the coming year. Go into the planning stages as I did with the original man and recreate yourself as I did. Comes the day Rosh Hashanah, but now is the days to lead up to that. This is the planning stage. This is the stage where I take inventory. Where am I holding? What type of person am I? What type of lackings do I have? What type of issues do I have? What type of challenges do I have to overcome? How to overcome them? What do I want to let go on the baggage of last year? And what do I want to capitalize on the real me of the coming year? Here's the magic wand. Spin it around your head and make yourself something bigger for the coming year. That's the opportunity of Elul. That is what we're calling the prerequisite to Teshuva. The Teshuva of Elul. And that's why in Elul, Ubachta, we cry. Because if you don't take this opportunity now, it is the biggest personal loss of the year. And the rabbis used to shake when they heard Elul was coming. But it wasn't the fear. It was the potential loss of the biggest opportunity that they could have. And if they fumble this, they lost it and everything that's going to follow the coming 12 months of the year. Wow. Let's go back home. Let's go back to Israel. I miss it so much. Let's ask Hashem to open the borders. But let's also ask Hashem to open the borders for me and you. To open our own borders. To work on ourselves. To make ourselves be able to take down the walls of our challenges and our lackings. And all our midot, God forbid, lo tovot. To get rid of them. Take down those borders and say, that's not who I want to be the coming year. That's not the man I'm creating new the coming year. And let's now start with a new bill of creating me. I want to be a Baal Rahman. I'm going to start being merciful from this point on. Hashem says, boom, you got it. I want to be a giver. I always wanted to be a giver. Hashem says, that's who you want to be? Boom, you got it. Plan with me together so that when the day of creation of man, Rosh Hashanah, comes, I will make you a hand-tailored suit exactly to the specifications that we came up with in the planning stages of the month of Elul, the prerequisite for the returning you, back to Hashem, the first step of Teshuva. And if you miss this out, you're going to cry your heart out because you missed out the greatest opportunity. So that when that great day comes, we can start the year a completely new person. Whew. I want to go home. It's time to go, ladies and gentlemen. The Geulah is so close. So incredibly close. And here comes a big year. And we're really hoping that this is going to be it. And I want to get there already with you as a community together. I want to pick up those wonderful people that made this community so amazingly incredible. And go to Eretz Yisrael and get ready to be Mikabel Pnei Mashiach. Let me tell you an amazing story. So, there was a young kid, and, many people go through stuff in life, to put it nicely. And every now and then you hear a story, and it moves you, because sometimes it reminds you of you when you were young. And sometimes it opens our hearts to realize, us and Hashem, please open your hearts to the following story. There was a guy coming home from the city. He was on his way back to, actually, Baltimore. And he gets on an Amtrak train. And he comes onto the train, and he looks around, and the train is packed. It's rush hour. No place to sit. So he's scouring up and down the rows, and he sees that a little bit further up to the front, There's a seat there that's opened and kind of empty, in spite of the fact of all the people standing in the aisle. So he pushes his way through, and finally, when he got a little closer, he realized why no one is sitting there. There was a kid that was sitting there with a hoodie over his head, and his eyes were blacked out, and he looked a little bit like a thug. And people were nervous to sit in front of the kid. But this guy realized his ride out to Baltimore is a good 3.5 hours. So he decided, he's sitting, kid or no kid. So he sat down, facing this kid. The kid looks up, and he gives him this look. And he saw such a broken heart in the look of this kid's eyes. So the guy actually kicked up a conversation, and he says to the kid, "Hey, you don't look good. What's going on? Are you all right? Can I help you?" The kid says, "No, man, just enjoy your ride. Enjoy your ride." But the guy saw that there was a heart behind this kid. And he saw pain on the face. So he couldn't let go. So he says to him, "Listen, we're going to be sitting here looking at each other for 3.5 hours. So come on, you never know. Just getting it off your chest already might feel good. If I can help you, even better. And if I can't, but, you're able to vent a little bit. What vexes thee? What's going on? What's bothering you?" So after pushing and pushing, finally the kid says, "All right, I'll tell you what's going on." He looks up at the guy and he says to him, "When I was young, I wasn't really too sociable. I was one of those nerds. And I used to come home from school, did my homework, and I sat around. And life wasn't too eventful for me. I didn't have too many friends." He says, then it turned out, one day my parents, who loved me so much, they put every penny they had together, and they bought me this incredible present. And they brought it home in this big box. I'll never forget. And they called me downstairs, and I was like so happy. I see this huge box, a present, and I ripped it open. I said, "What is it?" And they said, "Son, we put our pennies together. We put everything we had, and we went out and we bought you a PC, a personal computer." And, in those days, it was one of those big, fat IBM, huge boxes. The story goes back 30 years. And he says, I hauled that computer up to my room, and I was so fixated on this computer, and I started to work with it and play with it. And I used to program on it, and I got really good at it. And every day I came home from school, I did my homework, and I spent the rest of the night on that computer until I fell asleep on the keyboard night after night. But I learned that computer inside and out, and I became literally one with the computer. He says, my life then changed. Now I had two loves in my life: the computer and the Baltimore Orioles, my favorite baseball team. I remember the people from Baltimore, they're crazy baseball fans. I remember when I was a kid, I went to camp, and we had a few Baltimoreans in the bunk, and night after night, we used to fight like cats and dogs, day and night. The Yankees, the Orioles, the Yankees, the Orioles. We had such machloket l'shem shamayim. Cal Ripken Jr. versus okay, whatever. You don't remember these players. Anyways, he says, now I had two love: the Baltimore Orioles and the computer. And he says, I decided that I'm going to start tracking my favorite players on the Orioles and all their stats on my computer. And every game I would highlight and update their stats. How many hits, how many stolen bases, how many home runs. I would figure out their ERAs. And I figured out a way to create a program that would actually update all the stats for all my favorite players automatically. And this was great. And now I was able to mesh my two love of life together, the computer with the Orioles. He says, one day my cousin comes down from New York, and my cousin's a big hotshot kid. Not like me. He's very in with everybody, sociable, millions of friends. He wines and dines people, fast talker, slick talker, sharp dresser. My cousin walks into my room, and I'm sitting there on my computer one night, and he says, "What are you up to? What are you doing?" I said, "Well, nothing." He says, No. What do you do with your life?" He says, "Well, my computer became my life." He says, "Really? What do you do with that silly old thing?" He says, "Well, I'll tell you the truth. I came up with something pretty cool. I figured out a way. I created a program that updates the stats and the ERAs of all my favorite players." He says, "Yeah, wow. Could I see it?" He says, I showed it to him, and he was amazed. He said, "This is brilliant. This is brilliant. You know, we can make a lot of money with this. Anyone would love to have this. Hey, kid, stick with me. We're going to make a lot of money together." And I said to him, "Fine. Hey, why not?" Sure enough, he takes me with him back to New York, and we sit in a few meetings, and we met a few lawyers, and after signing all different types of paper, he says, "I'm going to take you to the next level. I'm going to take your idea and create a .com." And I said to him, "A dot what?" "A .com." "What's that?" He says, "Just relax. You'll see. We're going to make a ton of money." And he says, little did I know, he took my program and he created a website. And there was a sports website, and people would come on and they would pay for the subscription as they put their players into my program. And he says, I couldn't believe it. I went back home and I started getting these letters in the mail. And one day I got a check for $100. And then after that, I got 3 checks for $100. And people started subscribing. And then the money started flowing in. I would get thousands and thousands of dollars a week. And this started going on for some time. I was making more money than most people in my neighborhood 3 times my age. And the money was just rolling in, 100 after 100 after hundreds of dollars. I became very independent. I decided, what do I need to go to school for? So against my parents' will, I dropped out of school. Because who needs it? I'm making more money than anyone would even imagine. And he says after that, my parents would tell me, son, what are you going to do with your future? I mean, what happens if, one day this thing doesn't work out? And I said to him, how could you even say that? I'm making more money than you. Do me a favor. Just deal with the rest of the kids. You don't have to worry about me. And we started to get into fights. And little by little, I just couldn't take it anymore. So I picked myself up. I took my knapsack with all my checks of hundreds and thousands of dollars, and I went up to the city. And I said goodbye to my parents. I'm not interested in seeing them anymore. And I came to live with my cousin. He's the high life. I rented myself this magnificent suite, a flat in Upper Manhattan. And I had parties, and I had friends, and I had all different types of great, enjoyable outings. But then one day, I'll never forget, my cousin comes in the middle of the parties, and he pulls me out to the side. He says, can I talk to you for a minute? And he says to me, tell me, do you have any other programs? I said, no. Do you know how to do anything else besides the program you originally made? I said, no. He says, well, we have a problem. I said, what's the problem? He said, I don't know how to tell you this. Somebody out there made practically the exact same program and put it up online for free. We're done. We're done. I said, what? He said, yeah, we're done. And sure enough, from what was $5,000 a week, little by little went down to $4,000, to $3,000, little as people started to find the same program for free, to $2,000, to $1,000, to $500 a week, to nothing. He said after that, I couldn't keep up the lifestyle. I had to give up the flat in New York City, the big penthouse apartment. No more of anything, no more parties, to the extent that I literally had to sell most of my furniture just to keep me going because I had no other source of income because I didn't know how to do anything else. And then finally I gave up my apartment and I started living in the subway. and I would play a little guitar, and people would throw me some quarters, and I was living on the street. Till one day I decided I can't do this anymore. So I literally took my last quarters and I wrote a letter to my parents. And I told my parents, I really messed up. And I so didn't appreciate what you did for me. And look how far I fell from my father, my mother. I want to come back. I want to come home. I realized that what I did was so terrible, you might not want me back. So I understand perfectly, and if that's the case, no problem. I'm buying with my last pennies a ticket to Washington. And I know that the train on the way to Washington stops in Baltimore. So there's this big tree right at the beginning of the station. When the train pulls in to the Baltimore stop, if you want me back, just put a big white flag on that tree. And that will be a sign for me to get off. And I'll come back. And if not, it's okay. I'll just simply look at the tree. If there's no white flag, I'll know that we just went our own ways. And I understand you for what I did to you. And I'll just continue on the train to Washington and try to make a new life for myself there. The guy says, wow, so what happened? The kid says, what do you mean? He says, so what happened? He says, I'm on the train right now. He said, oh, you mean this is it? He says, yeah, right now, this is it. I'm waiting. We're going to get to Baltimore in another few stops. And I'm waiting to see if they want me back or not. If they're going to put out the white flag or not. And the guy starts getting all fidgety. He says, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I'm sitting here with you at that moment when, your whole life is coming down. He says, okay, kid, don't worry. It's your parents. He says, no, you don't know what I did to them. I don't think they're going to want me back. He says, no, kid, it's your father. He says, I know, but I broke his heart. He says, yeah, but don't worry. And as the train comes into the next stop, the conductor announces, Baltimore, next stop. The train pulls out and it's on his way, and the kid is getting all nervous and he's starting to bite his nails and he's pulling the hoodie over his face and he's actually getting emotional, not knowing what to expect, because here comes one of the biggest moments that's going to literally decide his life. And the train starts coming closer to the Baltimore stop, and there's this turn that the train takes as it pulls into the Baltimore station. And the kid's last second, he says, I can't look. I can't. It's too much. And the guy says, relax, kid. I'll look for you. I'll look for you. I will look for you. And the train takes that turn and pulls into the Baltimore stop. And the guy turns around. And suddenly, as the train makes the turn into the platform, he sees the big tree right there in front of the platform. And he looks back at the kid. And the kid says, is there a flag? And he says, no. There's no white flag. He said, what? He says, there's no white flag. But the entire tree is covered in white. And the kid jumps up and he looks out and he sees the entire tree is literally covered in white from top to bottom. And there is an older man and an older woman with their arms out, looking with tears on the train, trying to see where is the son that they're about to embrace. Ani lidodi v'dodili. Elul. It's the prerequisite to Teshuva. It's the realization that we did fall so far apart from each other. But it's also the time that Hashem literally covers the tree in white and puts his arms out and says we fell very far apart. But this is the time that we can bridge the gap back together. Between me and you, between me and you, between us and the source of everything that gives us and helps us to be what we should be. This is the time that we have the power to create together with Borei Olam the new me and you, bridging the gap between everything that we shouldn't be to everything we will be the coming year. Thank you for listening.